Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow.
Hey everybody, welcome to the broadcast. We've got a lot to talk about on the life issue because we have got a series of cases that from the Supreme Court of the United States all the way down to administrative proceedings at universities. I mean, this is the scope and breadth of the pro-life fight that we're engaged in at the ACLJ. Now, as you know, we have maintained a pro-life position for 3 decades. I have argued in a number of cases involving the life issue at the Supreme Court of the United States. A case has been heard called National Institute of Family and Life Advocates versus Becerra. That case was granted review at the Supreme Court of the United States. It is a case involving crisis pregnancy centers or women health centers. These are organizations that give advice and counsel to women rather than seeking an abortion. Now, Cece Hollis, the senior counsel at the ACLJ, she's with me today on this broadcast. And Cece, you have been litigating these cases. We've been litigating these cases, my goodness, for really almost 3 decades. I'm trying to think, the first time we had a medical center, a crisis pregnancy center case was probably in the early 90s, and then I did a whole series of them out of New York.
Yes.
Yeah, so first of all, talk to everybody about the importance of what these clinics actually do.
Well, the crisis pregnancy centers are just a great resource for any young lady who finds themselves pregnant and has some concerns possibly. They do tests. They will help them even after the child is born with car seats. They go through the whole entire process. And of course, they do ultrasounds and everything else. And that is a target that Planned Parenthood does not want going up against them. They're the enemy to Planned Parenthood.
And they really, I mean, like for instance, on the ultrasound issue, they really fight on the ultrasound issue because they know that when the woman in a crisis situation actually sees the child, that is very compelling evidence to not go forward with an abortion. So they even fight those kind of they fight the ultrasounds, they fight informed consent.
They do. Anytime where they think someone who is in a crisis pregnancy situation would have time to think about their decision or actually see that this is a human life, a baby inside them, those are absolutely the centers that they want to go after. And they target them systematically, and they have done that, like you said, for decades.
So we're in court in California. We're also in court in Hawaii. We've got a pro-life case in Illinois and another pro-life case that we're dealing with, a series of them in New York and in North Carolina. So we've got a broad swath of cases on the life issue, and this is something that's really important. We've got a lot more of the discussion on the life issues that we are dealing with at the American Center for Law and Justice. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to the broadcast, everyone. I'm in our media center today with Cece Hollis, Senior Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice. She's in here with us. And also in our Washington, D.C. office is Than Bennett. And Than, I want to go with you because we're talking about the life issue. I mentioned, I want to say this again. In California, we have cases that are now at the Supreme Court of the United States. In Hawaii, we have pro-life cases. In Illinois, pro-life cases. In New York, we're defending life. In North Carolina, we're defending life. So understand, this is a big part of the work of the American Center for Law and Justice, a big part of what we do. We're also taking your phone calls and want to know from you how important this life issue is to you at 1-800-684-3110. But then there is a letter that's been signed by members of the United States Congress, and I want you to talk about this. Is deep concern over a report. This came out yesterday by several court cases, state health departments, and testimonials from former Planned Parenthood employees that highlight multiple instances where Planned Parenthood facilities across the country have repeatedly and deliberately failed to report the suspected either sexual abuse of minors in their care or even sex trafficking issues in some cases.
This is incredibly troubling, Jay. I mean, this goes back to the Title X funding that we've talked about so much. You know, Planned Parenthood and other abortion clinics get a lot of that Title X family planning money, but Jay, it goes to other types of facilities as well. And all of them are obliged to follow a very common sense requirement. And that would be that if they see instances of child abuse, that they report it to the authorities. Jay, it is such a common sense requirement. I mean, for goodness sakes, if you see a child who's being abused, of course you should have an obligation to report that. And Title Title X for a long time has had that requirement that if you see it, you must report it. But, Jay, there are now documented instances of repeated child abuse that Planned Parenthood specifically has not reported. This letter that you referenced, it's signed by 56 members of the U.S. House and the United States Senate. By the way, led by 2 female members, Vicky Hartzler in the House, Joni Ernst in the United States Senate, referring to the Department of Health and Human Services these instances of abuse. Jay, so we've talked about the defunding of Planned Parenthood through Title X. This is another level of this. If child abuse is reported or is seen, it must be reported. These members of Congress want HHS to look at these instances and do a full investigation on Planned Parenthood.
So this is something we're encouraging as well. Now, I want to tell you something else. It's something we don't talk about often, CC, on the broadcast, and that is we did a project. It lasted the legal research alone lasted well over a year. And that was on the sex trafficking issue, because what you'll find is these sex traffickers, and a lot of them come right up the expressways. So, when we talk about border security, I always say my concern with border security is primarily this issue of sex trafficking, because these sex traffickers come right up from our borders, through our borders, right up to the major expressways. We drafted model legislation for all that could be implemented in all 50 states on this issue. And it ties into the abortion issue, because oftentimes these young girls that are caught up in sex trafficking will end up getting pregnant. And of course, what do these sex traffickers do? They go after abortions. Now, here's the problem. It's not so much the abortion issue there. I mean, that's still an issue for the unborn child, obviously, and the mother and the repercussions that have. But why are we allowing sex traffickers to do this? Now, there's law enforcement activity on this, but not enough. And and the laws are also are difficult, because sometimes it makes the woman, or most of the time, Stacey, they're not even, say women, they're girls, caught up in sex trafficking is somehow the defendant in these cases when they're the victim of these cases.
Correct. And that's what we did. We did a legal analysis of all 50 states.
It was a year and a half long project.
It was a long project, and we did a very in-depth study and a legal analysis in each 50 state, their laws. And we looked into it because a lot of the laws currently didn't really address sex trafficking. They just weren't ready and prepared to recognize sex traffickers. And then what do you do with them once you find them?
So we prepared, this is actually what we produced, called Protecting Innocence Legislative Framework. But I will tell you, I'm holding in my hand. You could not hold in your hand what the volume of material that we produced for this.
That is correct. It was reams and reams of documents. And again, it was analyzing the laws in each state of the United States, and trying to give just help and suggestions of how we can stop sex trafficking in the United States of America.
So here's what I want everybody to understand what Cece just said. I mean, this is we're talking about projects that are not just write a memo or even run to court. This is when you're talking about writing laws for 50 states, and every there's a lot of nuances in these state laws to try to go after the sex traffickers. And if you've got a consistent pro-life position, all of this counts. And now you've got the concern, then, as you mentioned, over Congress. Now, I mean, I know if we say, why are we still funding Planned Parenthood, there's going to be questions here. But we've got a Facebook question that came in, and we're taking calls as well at 1-800-684-3110. This came in from Gloria. She said, could this investigation be a catalyst for defunding Planned Parenthood for good? So this is the most frustrating issue we deal with legislatively, which is the defunding of Planned Parenthood. Gloria has a really good question. Where are we on that? And when you get these reports, to me, it sets, again, a message on why there has to be oversight here.
Well, I think that's true, Jay. I think it gives us yet another opportunity to get over the line on defunding Planned Parenthood. Again, I think it's important for people to understand this. There are two main funding streams. One is on the Medicaid side, where they get about 80% of their federal funding. Jay, we were within one vote in the United States Senate of accomplishing that defunding. So this is yet another instance where we could get over that. But look, on the other side, it's a smaller amount, sure, but guess what the Trump administration has done? They have a rule that has been proposed to defund Planned Parenthood of the remaining portion of their federal funds. We are preparing, as you know, Jay, to file a comment in support of that regulation. It's due on July 31st, and our members can add their name to that filing. So I think Gloria is correct. This is another move in the proper direction. And just one more thing, Jay. There's a direct tie to the conversation you were just having with Cece, because all of these efforts, whether they're the cases or the funding efforts, you know where most of this ends up being fought out? It's in state-based litigation. So whether it's the human trafficking or the funding, it usually ends up in state-based litigation. So we follow the fight there as well.
I look at the report on the litigation we're involved in. I mean, it is literally coast to coast. I mean, and we're going to go over that in the next couple of segments of the broadcast. But let me go ahead and take a phone call. We're taking your calls at 1-800-684-3110. That's 800-684-3110. Let's go to Karen. She's calling from Virginia. Hi, Karen.
Hi. I'm calling in response to how important it is to me to do something about the abortion that's going on in America. I think is abhorrent, killing live human beings when they're defenseless, and what Planned Parenthood is doing with the money that they're getting from this, and how it's just so totally wrong. So that's
I appreciate you calling in on that. Look, this is a long and at times frustrating fight, but let me tell you where the kind of the avenues are on this. There's multiple fights. Stan's working on the legislative framework, which is the defunding framework. That's to get the money out of Planned Parenthood. They moved about $65 million out, which is something, but not near enough. But that's all the president could do under his authority as president. So that's one avenue. Then the second avenue is the litigation we're involved in. And we're doing litigation. And as I said, we're going to go on that later in the broadcast. But I mean, literally, folks, coast to coast, from the Supreme Court of the United States to administrative hearings at universities. I mean, that's how broad the swath is of what we're covering on the life issue. Then the sex trafficking issue, I tie right in with this because, look, this is a global problem and it's a national problem for the United States of America. And we've got to recognize that the young girls that are caught up in this, to then prosecute them for the prostitution laws, a 16-year-old kid in sex trafficking, is ridiculous, and that's my personal view. And the criminals there are these guys that are running these cartels. That's what this is, and it all ties in. It all ties into the abortion issue. It all ties into the life issue. All of this, Cece, is part and parcel of the same core issue where you've got to defend human dignity and human rights.
You do, and that's the absolute basis of all of this. We have so taken life and made it nothing. And so the life of a baby is nothing, and the life of a 15-year-old girl in sex trafficking is nothing. And that's what you see Planned Parenthood do over and over again. They let us know that they don't care about women. They don't care about babies. They care about dollars. And that's the fight, is we have to stand up for life. We have to stand up for its value of a baby and of children that are being sex trafficked.
I will tell you something on the sex trafficking issue. I think if you look at the border security issue, this is a big part of it. Dan, it's not getting the attention I think it should. But the fact is, we know that through our borders and our porous borders, these sex trafficking cartels, that's what they do. And they go right up these major expressways. I mean, they go right up 65, 75, all the ones that run north to south. And then they can get on the ones that go east to west. So once they're in, it's very easy for them to move around.
About because policymakers are uncomfortable talking about it. I'm just going to say it like
but we
it is.
have
they want to talk about
I know that. Stan,
yes.
I'm with you there 100%. I know it's not a comfortable topic, but my goodness, it's an epidemic. It really
they should
is.
be ashamed of themselves if they're too uncomfortable to talk about it, quite frankly, because the drug cartels are a huge problem. But guess what? You cannot separate them from the human trafficking project that they have underway. The drug cartels and the human trafficking go hand in hand. So, look, this is going to come to a head in the United States House of Representatives this month, Jay, and human trafficking has to be at the center of that conversation. Guess what? When it's come up before, it has not been, and that is to their great shame.
All right. We've got a lot more of the discussion on the life issues that we are dealing with at the American Center for Law and Justice. Stay tuned. Look, I've been fighting this life issue since the 80s, back in the days of Operation Rescue. I've been fighting this issue since literally 1987, I think. Was to the Supreme Court, I think, 3 or 4 times on it. So this is an issue that's core to the American Center for Law and Justice and has been since our founding. So this is a big deal for us, a big issue for us. But what I've seen develop over the last decade, I think it's fair to say, is and my brother-in-law said this years and years ago. He's a radiologist, major hospital in Atlanta. He said, this is probably 30 years ago. He said, the technology is going to get so good that there's going to be no argument that this is a baby. That this idea that this is a bunch of cells is just going to be out the door because the technology, the imaging technology, is going to be so good that there's going to be no dispute. And I've talked to my friend, I'll never forget, talked to my friend, Dr. Ben Carson, who's now Secretary of HUD. This is when he was a practicing surgeon, neurosurgeon, that they were doing in utero surgeries at 18, 19, I think 20 weeks, I guess, was kind of the average there. They were doing surgery in utero at 20 weeks. I did the partial birth abortion cases, worked on those at the trial level all the way to the Supreme Court in the United States. So this has been an issue that's been close to us for a long time. And Cece, I know for you, as an advocate, this has been one of your motivating forces of why you got involved in public advocacy.
Absolutely, because life is precious and it's worth protecting. As a mother of 2 children, I've personally gone through that, and I see the life, and I can't imagine not protecting my children at every stage of their life, and that includes the moment of conception. They are a living being, and so I'm very passionate about it, and I'm thrilled at all of our advocacy that we do at the ACLJ.
I want to tell you something. Whether it is at the Supreme Court of the United States or an administrative hearing or putting together a 50-state solution to sex trafficking, which all ties into the life issue and human dignity, defending women in these cases. I keep calling women. A lot of them are young girls. I've got granddaughters. I mean, it motivates me now, and it's hard to be more motivated on the life issue than I already was. But when you stare at your young grandchildren and you realize you're and of course, also look, I come to this personally. I mean, I saw those imaging of my grandchildren when they were babies, not yet born, not yet. They were unborn babies. I mean, I thought imaging was incredible for all 4 of my grandchildren. So, and I know that's just going to become more and more significant. So I'm going to tell you something. We have no option on this issue. Now, it's frustrating when you deal with Planned Parenthood, and it's because, look, when we're fighting at the Supreme Court of the United States, it's not just the state of California. It's NARAL. It's Planned Parenthood. It's all these groups because this is their business, Stan. This is what they do.
Well, it's a
and they're
huge
big, and their lobby and their efforts in Washington are huge.
They are $1.3 billion in revenue business, Jay, and that is not counting the political side. I want to say that again, $1.3 billion, not counting the political side, and they get almost half of that, more than $500 million from the federal taxpayers. But let me tie it into what you just said, Jay. I mean, the technology to this point is at a point where their only option is to deny mothers access to that information, because by the time you realize you're pregnant, you can hear the heartbeat. And usually by the time you go in for your first appointment, somewhere around 9 or 10 weeks, you can see a 3D or even a 4D image of your child. My wife and I have been through this recently, and Jay, if you look at that image, there is not a person on the planet that can deny it's a child. The only way that Planned Parenthood can get a mother to still make a choice for an abortion is if they refuse that mother access to the technology that's available today.
They don't even, the argument that it's not a life anymore, really, I mean, I think the all those undercover videos that came out, all of that, Cece kind of eliminated that. Now, you were very involved in these. We had a series of crisis pregnancy center cases in New York. But you've been involved in this. I think it's important for people to understand why it isn't so important. I mean, we got a great comment from one of our viewers on Facebook. I'm gonna pull it up right now. And again, if you want to talk to us, 1-800-684-3110. Isla on Facebook says, I'm so very grateful for your updates and keeping us informed on all your pro-life work. God bless you all. Well, let me tell you something. That's why I wanted to do it on this Friday. Been a lot of news on other things this week. We've had to deal with Iran. You got North Korea, a whole host of things. But I wanted to spend this Friday on talking about what we're doing in courts around the globe, literally around the globe on this issue, because you've got to realize what we're fighting for here. And it's a generation. Now, I will tell you this. I'm also optimistic that this younger generation is very pro-life. And I think a lot of it's the technology has really helped. But also the messaging has helped. This isn't, it's not against the women. It's to defend the child. Cece?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. The younger generation, they're the ones that have seen their ultrasounds. My children have seen their ultrasound. They see that, wow, that was me as a baby, unborn baby, and here I am now alive. So it doesn't take a big jump to go from an unborn child is a living human being that needs to be protected. And, Planned Parenthood is great at skewing that message because, as you said, they know that they're not going to win that fight anymore. That's why they don't want to show anyone an ultrasound. And that's why they changed the terminology from an abortion or killing a baby to, reproductive rights of the women. It's a woman's right. And they totally change it from abortion and killing a baby. They don't talk about that anymore. It's access to reproductive services.
Yeah. So, we wrote this model legislation for all 50 states. And Than, you're pointing this out. And this is true. Part of the problem was in the sex trafficking issue, they were making the girls the defendant. And the girls were the victim in the sex trafficking issue. And
it was unbelievable.
The focus was completely backwards in the state legislation here. I mean, you're going to prosecute the 15-year-olds for prostitution when they're in sex trafficking? I mean, why don't you go after the person that's put them in that spot? But anyways, that's why we wrote the legislation.
Yeah, it was totally tragic, Jay. You'd have a girl who had been a victim of trafficking, and even policymakers here in Washington, D.C. wouldn't want to appear soft on prostitution. So often that mother, that girl, that young child who had been abused was actually the one that ended up being a defendant in a court of law. That's one of the main reasons we engaged in this model legislation writing, is so that we could get it right on the state level, and then when it percolated up to a federal level, it would be proper as well.
I want to also, can I mention this Gerber story at the end here? Gerber's had the Gerber baby for a long time. The current Gerber baby is now in a picture with the first Gerber baby. The first Gerber baby is now 91 years old. Do we have that photo? Yeah, we're putting that up. And the newest Gerber baby is Lucas Warren, is the first Gerber baby to have Down syndrome. He is, little Lucas is the poster child for Gerber. This is the Gerber baby. And he's being held by the first Gerber baby, who's now a 91-year-old grandmother. And I guess they were in the same area of the country, and they were able to work this out. And this young boy has Down syndrome. And the idea that there would be justification to take the life of these children because of a disability, to me, is an outrage. And I think the American people are there and understand that. Hats off to Gerber for doing this. I think it was great and a beautiful baby. And we have to understand that the least among us, or the greatest among us, whoever it is, you defend life. Well, that's going to do it for the broadcast this week. Let me encourage you to do this. First of all, continue to pray for our legal team around the globe as we defend freedom and liberty and defend life. But also, your support of the Trinity Broadcasting Network lets us come to you each and every week at no cost to us. We're not paying for airtime, which is great. So that lets us put lawyers in the field defending life. We encourage you to support TBN. Have a great week.